Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Glasco.
You hear me? Can you hear me okay? Not loud enough? Loud enough? Yes? Okay. I'm not used to speaking this long without Quinetha Frazier, my partner, interrupting me, so bear with me. So first I want to thank you for the great introduction. I want to thank Dr. Terry Bloom, the school, and all of you for being here in attendance. So I want to start off with a discussion about using capitalism for a higher purpose. But I want to be clear that this is more about people than it is about capitalism or social entrepreneurship. I want to start off with a discussion about capitalism to begin with. And that discussion is that our current form of capitalism has no concept of right or wrong. It only recognizes what is profitable. For evidence of this, you can look no further than the payday loans used almost exclusively by the poor, which have APRs that range from 300% to over 700%. High fructose corn syrup, which replaced cranberries and Ocean Spray's cranberry juice because it was more profitable to do so, even though it was less healthy for people to digest. And then there's synthetic collateralized debt obligations, my favorite, CDOs. The financial institutions sold to their clients, then bet against them by short selling. However, I see capitalism serving a higher purpose through social entrepreneurship. Before discussing anything about social entrepreneurship, I'm going to begin with why. That is, why social entrepreneurship is needed to serve a higher purpose. Because too often, we become enamored with solutions before we understand the problem. The journey we are taking with social entrepreneurship, like any other journey, starts with the problem we're trying to solve, including what specific result are we trying to achieve. Through social entrepreneurship, we want to help solve or alleviate the issues of poverty or near poverty. Borrowing from Darrell, social entrepreneurship allows us to hack at the roots instead of the branches. We have the potential for further greatness as a country. That greatness will be measured in part by Gandhi's observation that the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. There's an anxiety in our country. That anxiety is about a changing America. Specifically, it is becoming different. And by different, I mean more multiracial and multicultural. This anxiety has played itself out in the obsession with attacking programs that benefit Americans in need, ranging from food stamps to the Affordable Care Act, which we've all heard of, Obamacare. It has manifested itself in anger that monies from the haves are being distributed to those people. Those people being code for the poor, who are usually overlooked and have been reduced to a set of stereotypes about them. This anger is being fueled by fear regarding the fact that the threat of economic insecurity is no longer a persistent problem of just the poor. Those people are most of us, because 4 out of 5 Americans in the U.S. will struggle with joblessness, near poverty, or reliance on welfare for at least some parts of their lives. The one thing I've come to realize is that there is not one face to poverty or near poverty. I have personally known a number of people, both in urban and suburban areas with homes, who on the surface seem to have everything, yet they have nothing. They've lost their jobs. They've taken new jobs that didn't pay very well. Their houses were underwater. They didn't have health insurance, and they were going into bankruptcy. They're just as much a victim of poverty as someone in downtown Atlanta in a food bank line, or someone who lives in Appalachia that lives in a shanty. Even as we've gained traction on the environmental front, social issues have lagged behind. The income gap in the United States has reached its widest point since 1928, which was the year before the stock market crashed. And poverty is encroaching on historic middle-class havens. During the 2000s, poverty grew twice as fast in suburban regions as in cities and rural counties. Dramatic inequity is bad for the environment, society, and the economy. Income inequality and entrenched poverty has kept us mired in a jobs versus environment vicious circle, where lack of jobs justifies the needs for harmful economic activities, resulting in impoverished communities desperately needing new jobs at whatever environmental and social price. Add to this the fact that for the vast majority of people, work is an important part of what defines them. Many of us identify much of our own ego with our work. This is such an important defining element of our being that unemployment is not just a financial crisis. It is a crisis of identity and personal worth. I've witnessed the destruction of people's self-esteem when they're unable to put bread on their family's table through their own efforts. And while poverty may be relative to the rest of the world, we do have an amount of poverty that leads to malnutrition, that leads to a series of diseases we don't tend to associate with our country, that leads to massively truncated life expectancy, and all but guarantees that from one generation to the next, poverty is going to be transmitted. This also leads to a mental state that is self-defeating and viewed simplistically by those without any contact with them to write them off as lazy, dumb, and wanting to live off of government assistance. I firmly believe there's an important role that only government can play in alleviating poverty. I also believe that social entrepreneurship can fill in the breach left by government and the current private sector that can have a positive long-term impact on the issues of poverty, near poverty, and those changing faces of America. As Nelson Mandela noted, poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. In dealing with poverty, I'm a firm believer that in the long run, wealth creation, understood as economic growth that benefits most of society, is the action needed to create the most effective way to alleviate poverty and near poverty. Social entrepreneurship gives us a new and more effective canvas to work with to alleviate poverty, one which has not been encumbered by the many challenges that existing organizations are grappling with that make them ineffective. Social entrepreneurs can have a positive impact on poverty, near poverty, and those changing faces of America by spurring a large number of financially successful social entrepreneurs, especially among women and minorities. This can result in more people being involved in wealth creation, as well as the workers who are helping create that wealth getting a nice slice of the pie. For this to succeed, it is important to directly involve people in the communities where poverty and near poverty exist, because they are the ones who see the opportunities where other people see hopeless futures. They see potential where other people see tragic consequences. They see a future that others cannot begin to imagine. They are not able to accomplish this alone. One of the best examples of a support system for social entrepreneurs come from the methodologies and disciplines used by venture funds in support of their portfolio companies, especially the 20 to 25 venture funds that account for over 80% of the returns in the industry. Currently, you can witness this being applied in the education sector through funds like New Schools Venture Fund, whose board includes John Doerr and Brooke Byers of Kleiner Perkins and Rob Stavis of Bessemer. Both of these funds are part of the 20 to 25 funds that I mentioned. And by the way, John Doerr himself was one of the early investors in Intel, as one of the rock stars in the venture industry, and Brooke Byers is a graduate of Georgia Tech. Using the venture capital model, social entrepreneurs can be mentored, taught, and assisted in building successful businesses that are sustainable, profitable, and create jobs. There's nothing magical about this part. We see the successful side of entrepreneurs supported by venture funds all of the time. The added twist is for these companies to have as part of their DNA giving back to the community, not impacting the environment, and solving social issues in a meaningful way. Through social entrepreneurship, capitalism can evolve to financially empower the disenfranchised so that they may climb out of poverty. My view, and that of my firm SMA, is that social entrepreneurship, using many of the principles of capitalism along with a social conscience, can create, foster, and grow companies that provide new opportunities. Opportunities which were never within the reach of certain segments of our population before. I have seen all flavors of individuals, teams, and organizations join the ranks of social entrepreneurship. I've also observed the term social enterprise used in all sorts of ways, some valid and some completely disingenuous. Many of these things are well-intentioned, and some even make a positive difference in the lives of people in our communities. But many of these models are not actually social entrepreneurship. How I see social entrepreneurship is that it is not about giving back. That is what many nonprofits are for, be that in donating 1 to 100% of their profits for a good cause. And it's certainly not about wealth redistribution. Social entrepreneurship is about empowering people to create wealth in a way that is good for people, communities, and the environment. And I wanted to get to this part, the why, before I got to me and my firm SMA, because I think that that gives you an understanding of where we come from. You know, I come from Texas. I'm a graduate of the University of Texas and Texas Tech University. I was responsible for recruiting or helping with the expansion of a number of technology companies such as Applied Materials, Motorola, Intel, Dell Computer, Samsung Semiconductor, Trilogy Development, Tivoli, a whole host of technology companies. I also come from the banking world, where I banked venture capital funds. Most of the funds I worked with were in that 20 to 25 group. I got an experience in terms of what provided me with firsthand knowledge about fund criteria, the value the funds provide, as well as the personalities and inner workings of venture funds. At SMA, I specifically work with entrepreneurs to develop revenue models and raise capital. However, what best describes me is that my interest and my concern is that we're not doing enough, as you can imagine, for those that are less fortunate than ourselves. And I think that we have the ability to do that. And that drives me slightly mad, actually. So with that, that's one of the motivations behind why I'm involved with social entrepreneurship. As far as our work at SMA, we embrace entrepreneurs who make a business of very defined social aims. Specifically, we help social entrepreneurs understand how to generate value that stays within their social mission in order to create earned income models and raise the capital needed to support those models. Because the social entrepreneurs do not generate value in the marketplace, it will not last long. This will result in customers leaving you and capital funders not seeing much upside in investing in you. We are fortunate to be working with social entrepreneurs that are making a difference in people's economic well-being. Some of these include boxcar grocers, an urban grocer bringing healthy foods to areas that lacked access to them. Gideon's Promise, providing training for public defenders throughout the U.S. The Gifted Education Foundation, Anthony Flynn, who's a phenomenal story in and of himself, which exists to produce first-generation college graduates from low-income communities across America. Sivamab, providing primary health care and insurance to low-income consumers in parts of India and Africa for a low-cost monthly subscription. And URoot, a crowdfunding platform that connects nonprofits with funding sources from individuals, businesses, and foundations. URoot.com if you want to see them, URUUT.com. What our clients have in common is that they make a business plan out of a social strategy, and profit is their business objective. Basically, their aim is to become profitable by creating a product or service that helps others. like our client Boxcar Grocers, who sells healthy food in food deserts at a profit. And by nature, their business solve a social problem by making healthy products more accessible. The hurdles. Social entrepreneurship emerged due to the need for a new kind of business structure that took into account people, the community, and the environment when making investment decisions. There is some cynicism towards social entrepreneurship from those that are comfortable with the status quo and from those who are suspect of anything that embraces capitalism. And while there are some people who will always be greedy and manipulate the system because they have looking at short-term financial results, I think being cynical is going to miss a major opportunity. I've witnessed it hundreds of times, especially when I was at Silicon Valley Bank, that most people go into business because they're eager to offer a product or service that provides customers and by extension society as a whole something of value. While social entrepreneurship can be the engine for change, impact investing is a source of fuel. Impact investing has the potential to be transformational. That potential rests on the focused and deliberate granting of access to capital to social enterprise that generate both a measurable social impact and a financial return. And that financial return is still evolving in this space. There are multiple capital structures available to help social entrepreneurs. Catalytic first loss capital, social impact bonds, pay it forward, crowdfunding, both equity and donation type of funding. And by the way, the Jobs Act was just released today by the SEC, so those rules are out for the equity side, as well as multiple types of debt and equity instruments. No matter the capital structure, there has to be the ability to create a return for investors or repayment for a loan. From my experience with social entrepreneurs, generating or having a well-defined path to generating revenues and profits is the challenge most of them face in terms of being able to raise capital and sustain their businesses. Based on our experience, here are the few of the challenges that social entrepreneurs face. Lack of angel investors. They are essential in the development and growth of social enterprises. Angel investors are those who use their own capital, were themselves entrepreneurs, who are willing to take the most risk and provide hands-on assistance to their investments. They are the bridge between bootstrapping and venture capital, and in this instance, we're talking about impact investors. The financial ecosystem for social entrepreneurs is still in an early stage. 38% of impact investment funds have more than a 3-year track record. However, there's no idea of what their returns are at this stage. And then 41% do not have a track record at all. Also, there are very few banks that understand early stage debt at this stage. It is not clear whether the business models developed along the traditional private equity lines of a general partner advising a limited partner is viable in this space. And then there's confusion about financial returns investors should expect from impact investors. More than 80% of impact funds target market rate returns. However, this brings into question their relevance since traditional funds play the same role and actually were in a lot of these sectors before them. Will capital be patient? There's an old-fashioned view that some of the most important businesses take time to ripen and become financially successful. And then there's measurements of social returns, which are not easy. Significant progress has been made in measuring, reporting, and scoring social returns, thanks to groups like B-Lab, GIN, and STAR, among others. However, asset owners and investors are not accustomed to measuring non-financial metrics. Measurements are vital, however, because social outcomes and accountability is what differentiates social entrepreneurs from both entrepreneurs and nonprofits. The problems and challenges that we are facing to alleviate poverty or creating a more inclusive economy are not due to a lack of knowledge. They're due to a lack of empathy for people. With social entrepreneurship, we have the power now to reach past what was and to create what will be. In the end, social entrepreneurship is one of the tools we can use to help create the kind of world we want to live in. A world where companies are part of the social fabric and safety net woven from excellent benefits, acceptance of diverse cultures, and a strong community. And with that, I am done. And I'll open it up for questions.
Darrell, thanks for coming out today to Georgia Tech, first of all. I guess my question relates to perhaps your business at Social Missions and Architects. You focused on issues related to poverty or near poverty, but what about other issues that are attacked by people who are also social entrepreneurs, such as like families in crisis, as an example, or environmental concerns? Are you also focused on those areas, or is it primarily poverty? The second question relates to, could you define yet again what you believe the difference is between a nonprofit and a social enterprise, which I assume from your discussion is primarily a for-profit business but has a social mission?
Wow, there's a lot of questions there. So let me, what we do is we work with companies and our organizations where they are their business model is solving a social problem. And they want to do that by making a profit. And to give you, my best example would be, let's take Payday Lenders. Here's a group, as I mentioned earlier, that's paying APRs at 300 to over 700%. Actually, I've actually seen it up to 2,000%. And so what you have is the ability, the risk profile of that can be reduced down, say, and not that 30% interest is great, but it's better than 300%. So we would work with an organization that would create something like that, because the organization itself the business itself is a social enterprise. It can't get out of that business. Versus a for-profit earned income models is probably the best way to look at it. So we're not, there's plenty of other groups, and we're not disparaging about anything other than that. Our role and our niche is in that space. And then the second question. We see everything associated with, when we're dealing with 80% of the population at near or, sort of teetering back to that point. Everything we do, whether it's helping them get better loan structures to, if they can reduce their energy costs, we see all of those things being part of alleviating poverty.
I guess my other question dealt with nonprofits, the role of nonprofits versus social enterprises.
I think the role of I can't give you the ultimate role of that. Actually, my partner, Quinitha, could probably do a better job of that. But what I can tell you that the for-profit side is that what we're looking at is, and this is really the crux of it, as simple as it is the earned income model. And so nonprofits, by the nature of their legal structure, have earned income models. And so to me, for what we like to see that because it's sustainable. Because if you're selling something to someone and you're marketing, you have more control over it than if you're trying to get a grant from some organization that may or may not do it every year.
Hi, I have a question right here in the middle. So something that you said really stuck out to me, kind of a quote I wrote down, you said that work defines people, and kind of poverty and unemployment hurts their egos. So this is something that you seem passionate about from your discussion. So my question is, have you ever had a personal experience where you caught yourself in that trap of letting your work define yourself, and how did you kind of come to that realization? And if not, that's okay as well.
I'm sorry, so the last part of it was?
So is there a time where you kind of caught yourself in that trap of letting your work define you? And if so, can you kind of expand on that experience?
All the time. It defines me now, but it's actually, my experience has been from watching people that I come from a world where I've watched companies go from zero to $1 billion in revenue, and I wasn't particularly impressed by the people that did that. And then I've seen people, just because of circumstances, they're sort of living hand to mouth, but was every bit as smart as those people. But they just didn't have the connections or the wherewithal to get there, but they had the abilities. And so, when I wrote that, that's where that came from, and looking at that. And I think that there's a sense, especially now, that we don't value people, and I think it's due to, the differences, lack of connections, lack of being able to understand where other people are coming from, talking about them, but not really experiencing where they're coming from. Because I think the majority of people are basically good, outside of bankers, by the way. But so I think that's really where that was coming from. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Darrell, can you hear me?
Yes.
So you mentioned that we often become enamored with solutions before we really understand the problem. So how are you guys working with the businesses that you work with to try and employ lean entrepreneurial practices that are really more customer-driven than product-driven?
Actually, that is our model, is to sit down and have a deep dive into what the mission of the organization or company is. Because if you don't have that motivation and that passion to begin with, then everything else, earned income models, et cetera, is sort of irrelevant. So that we start with that. What is your mission? Is your mission to educate young men who've never been able to go to college? Are you trying to solve issues health issues by bringing healthy foods to a certain area? And then we look at the options for earned income models, and then we back that up with how do we validate that in the marketplace, along with figuring out what are all the other resources, legal, what kind of capital you need to raise, et cetera.
Yeah, Darrell, I have a question about free markets and your concept. You said that government plays a vital role in people's lives, and ideologically speaking, the other side would be uninhibited free markets. Could you talk about why you think that amorality is not ideal, or why that's a problem for your mission?
My favorite subject. So I just had a conversation on this a little bit earlier, but free markets, first of all, I think free markets is sort of a misnomer, because no market is free. I mean, it's always gotten some assistance, whether you're talking about the railroads who got free land from the government, or you're talking about farmers who had electrification, which was subsidized by the government, so it allowed them to produce more, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that what I see, and going back to the comment I made about capitalism, is that it's a tool that has no conscience, and that's not a bad thing, and it's not a good thing. It's just what it is. In my experience in the finance world, the only thing that people cared about, and whether they can talk about community and giving back and all that, but at the end of the day, the thing that I heard every day was shareholder value. What is our shareholders going to return? And to me, I think it's an efficient model. I think there's great things that capitalism does, but I think that it can be tweaked through social entrepreneurship to do positive things for people. Because ultimately, it's about how do we get more distribution, not redistribution, but distribution of wealth. And so I think unbridled capitalism or free markets is not a good thing, because it's not concerned with what we do to the environment. It's how much can we get away with. And by the way, I can give you a specific story on that front. Sitting down with a fund that I banked, I won't give you the name, but we were sitting down, and they had a company that was doing fuel from corn. I forgot the name of it, but a synthetic fuel, and so they were in violation of an environmental regulation, and they were actually calculated the cost that would have been actually cheaper to pay the fine than to put the equipment in. And so but it was, I mean, that's all perfectly fine in a purely free market world. but that's not good from a societal perspective. So that, I don't know if that answers your question.
If you were placed in your client's shoes, what would be like one topic or one issue that you would want to go and be a social entrepreneur and solve?
Oh, I've talked about it at the beginning, payday lenders. I mean, I think it's a horrible industry that you have people that, and for those, you know, I don't want to presuppose that everybody know what they are. The people that use payday lenders are people that are living hand to mouth. And so the reason that they use these companies is because, you know, they've had some breakdown, like they've lost a tire. I mean, it's things that we take for granted that you can pay on a credit card. They don't have the money to do that. And so they go to these people that charge them these high interest rates. And they're really onerous. And they don't have to be. That industry could be profitable at a much lower interest rate than what they're charging. And so if that would be one thing, I think that it would be huge. You know, you'd have to get by a lot of legal hurdles to probably get through that. But I think that would be a huge industry. That would be one.
Okay. Hi, Darrell. Great talk.
Hello.
You know what I'm going to ask about is measurements. So 2 questions. One is, are impact investors considering measurements of things like well-being, which is a little bit hard, but it's something that has been shown to contribute to, I mean, at the corporate level, the companies with good well-being measurements are also doing better than others. And then the second question is about this idea of attribution versus contribution. You know, a small company might be doing something to address one piece of the big poverty pie, but then there's systemic issues that might be harder for one business to deal with. So how are people dealing with the systemic measurements of change?
The first one I can answer is no. No. I think that well-being is such a hard measurement, because what do you measure? You know, and so do you measure an output or do you measure an outcome? And so I think the major things, and I think measurements are evolving. You know, as I mentioned, GIN and B Corp and a few of the others have all of these measurements. And I think that the concern I have with measurements is that we lose sight of the fact that we're measuring, you know, we're measuring things that may not be measuring an outcome. You know, and so we get, you know, very bureaucratic about the output. You know, so let's say, you know, you're trying to help people's well-being, but what is, for someone, I think that definition has such a broad context for a lot of people. For example, my well-being might be making $100,000 next year, whereas somebody else's well-being might be just getting a job. So, you know, the question is, how do you measure that? And so I think that in terms of those types of measurements, I think that there's definitely some science going behind that. And investors are looking at that. That 80% that I mentioned, though, are not really into that as much as that other 20%. And that's why I was saying that the impact investors that are just market rate returns, and then I talked about the GP and LP structure, I don't think carries over very well to this structure, but that's another discussion. And then the second part was? Systemic versus attribution versus contribution. Meaning that, is there a collaboration along? I think that we're in an early stage of that. I think that, and this is really why I like social entrepreneurship versus organizations, because as you well know, I mean, there's some collaboration, but there's turf battles. And because social entrepreneurship is so new, you don't have these turf battles already. And so, and I think by the nature of the entrepreneurship side, that there is a desire to collaborate, because it's like, if you can help take this off my plate and I can still be successful doing X, Y, and Z, I'm going to work with you. If not, I'm going to go with somebody else. So I think that these issues definitely cannot be solved by just one group. But I think that there does need to be more collaboration, and I think that that's a model inherent to social entrepreneurship.
I was wondering if you had seen common traits or characteristics with the people and companies you've been working with that have been successful, and if so, what are they?
I think that the two components that I've seen that have served social entrepreneurs well is one is that there's a passion about their mission. They're very clear about what they want to achieve. That's the foundation of it. And then the second part of it, which it's very mundane, but it's the basic blocking and tackling along financial, the business side. And those are the two keys that I've seen. You know, where I've seen failure is mission's not clear, and you know, they're you know, going to be very simplistic. You know, their income statements and balance sheets either are non-existent or they're a mess. And so, you know, those are just, you know, the two basics that I've seen that doesn't sound sexy, but it's really important for them to do.
Okay, yeah. This is an area I'm really interested in. That's why I have so many questions. But
The more
this
the
may be
merrier.
a little more provocative than I really intend for it to be, but the question is basically this: are we making a strategic error by talking about social entrepreneurs as if there's some sort of different class of individual from regular entrepreneurs? Because it seems to me that for example, would a regular entrepreneur say, well, I don't want to address this problem because this is a problem for social entrepreneurs, where shouldn't all entrepreneurs to some extent be considering how they can develop their businesses in a way that's responsible and addresses the needs of society, as well as, you know, driven by their product and market strategies? And by focusing so much on social entrepreneurs as sort of a separate breed, are we sort of missing the boat in terms of how we actually teach entrepreneurship in schools?
Well, I don't know about the part about teaching entrepreneurship in schools, but I think there's a really important difference, and one is as I mentioned earlier, is shareholder value. You know, and not that entrepreneurs have this, but when you go with a Kleiner Perkins, you know, which I mentioned earlier, I mean, they don't care what you're going to do with the environment. They want to know. I mean, they want to know that you're doing everything legally, and they want to know what their return is. You know, if you can hire, you know, 50 kids in Panama to make shoes and give them a return, they don't care as long as it's legal. And I think that's where social entrepreneurship is different. I think that it's the human side of it, is that there's a concern about what do we pay, how do people benefit from this, versus how do a small group of investors benefit from it. So I think that there is a key difference, and I think that the investors that are involved in it, some of the better investors, are really pushing both the metric side and making sure that these things stay honest on that side of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darrell, for coming.